The clinking of champagne glasses had barely faded, a delicate chime that softened into the low hum of congratulations and the gentle melodic strumming of a live guitarist, when I felt it. A cold, sharp jab, entirely disconnected from the effervescent bubbles of the champagne that still tickled my throat. The sensation emanated from across the cavernous reception hall, specifically from the table occupied by my sister's new in-laws, their faces a carefully constructed tableau of forced smiles that barely masked something far less pleasant, something almost predatory. My gaze, almost involuntarily, drifted in that direction, and my eyes met those of my sister's new mother-in-law. Her lips, parted only slightly, formed a single word. Though the ambient noise of the celebration, a vibrant symphony of joyous chatter and laughter, rendered her utterance inaudible, I understood it perfectly. I knew with an absolute certainty, from the subtle curl of contempt that laced her lips, from the dismissive, almost imperceptible wave of her hand as she spoke to her husband, and from the way her eyes flicked over me, then swept across the entire room, as if meticulously cataloging every single thing that failed to meet her exacting unspoken standards. It was a single precisely calculated moment, a small venomous dart expertly aimed not merely at me, but at the very essence of who I was and by extension, at the very identity of my sister, now inextricably bound to this formidable family. My sister Sarah had always been the radiant sunshine of our family, a beacon of optimism and joy. Her marriage was envisioned as a beautiful, harmonious confluence of two lives, two families, a vibrant celebration of a profound and genuine love. And for the most part it truly was. The ceremony itself was everything she had ever dreamed of, a picture-perfect tableau. She had looked utterly ethereal, her smile a radiant, almost incandescent glow, and my heart had swelled with an overwhelming surge of pride and unadulterated happiness for her. The groom, Mark, was unequivocally a good man, possessing a kindness and a genuineness that was palpable, and it was abundantly clear that he adored her. It was his family, the O'Connells, however, that cast the first subtle shadow over the otherwise perfect day. From the very moment they arrived, a distinct air of scrutiny descended upon our gathering. It wasn't merely the polite observation one might expect at such an event, but a palpable judgmental appraisal. They hailed from a wealthy, established family in a different city, a world away from our own, and from their hushed, conspiratorial conversations and the barely concealed eye rolls that punctuated their interactions, it was abundantly clear that they perceived our family, and by extension our heritage, as something provincial, somehow beneath them. It was a subtle, almost insidious undercurrent, a constant, low hum of disapproval that, fortunately or unfortunately, only those paying the closest, most discerning attention could truly detect. I, unfortunately, possessed that keen observational faculty. It was during the series of toasts, those moments meant to honor the couple, that this subtle undercurrent became undeniably overt. Mark's father delivered a genuinely lovely, heartfelt speech, filled with warmth and sincere well wishes. Then it was Mr. O'Connell's turn. He stood, a crystal glass held firmly in his hand, a patronizing smile plastered across his face like a mask. He began, it must be said, on a relatively pleasant note, waxing poetic about Mark's good fortune, about his discovery of such a truly wonderful woman. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the tone shifted. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to scrape against the cheerful atmosphere. "Sarah's a gem," he declared, his voice carrying a little too easily, a touch too resonantly through the microphone. "A real find. We're just so pleased she's joining a family with certain standards, not like some of the less refined backgrounds one encounters these days." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering with an almost theatrical deliberation on my parents, then on me. "It's important, you know," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, as if imparting a profound secret, "to marry into the right circles, where lineage and established traditions are respected." The air in the hall seemed to thicken, to press in on us. My parents, who had poured their entire lives into working tirelessly to provide Sarah with every possible opportunity, every advantage, stiffened almost imperceptibly. My own blood ran cold, a chilling sensation that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. It wasn't merely about being labeled less refined. It was a direct, albeit veiled, insult to my family's deeply cherished cultural background, to the vibrant traditions we held dear, to the aromatic food we cooked with love, to the soulful music we adored, to the rich tapestry of stories we told. The way he had uttered the phrase "less refined" was utterly drenched in a condescension that spoke volumes, an unspoken declaration of his true disdainful thoughts. My mother's face, usually a landscape of effortless warmth, was now a meticulously crafted mask of carefully controlled hurt. My father's jaw tightened, a subtle but telling sign of his inner turmoil. Sarah, bless her inherently optimistic and somewhat oblivious heart, looked initially confused, then a faint flush crept up her neck, as if she thought he was attempting some sort of awkward, poorly executed joke. Mark, however, looked utterly mortified. He nudged his father, a silent plea etched in his wide eyes. Mr. O'Connell, either genuinely oblivious to the palpable discomfort he had created or perhaps utterly uncaring, simply offered another infuriatingly condescending smile and then sat down, a ripple of uncomfortable, suffocating silence following his every movement. The remainder of the evening, for me, passed in a blur of forced smiles and the exhausting, awkward ritual of small talk. I made a conscious effort to avoid the O'Connell table, their presence casting a pall over my enjoyment. My interactions with them were kept deliberately brief and impeccably polite, my politeness serving as a thin, fragile veneer over a steadily growing ember of deep-seated resentment. This was Sarah's day, her moment of profound happiness, and I absolutely would not allow their ingrained ugliness to mar it. But later that night, lying awake in the quiet darkness, the echo of his words, less refined, certain standards, continued to reverberate in my mind. It wasn't simply an insult. It was a profound dismissal of everything that made my family, that made us undeniably us. In the months that followed the wedding, Sarah seemed, for the most part, blissfully unaware of the subtle undercurrents of disapproval that had permeated her special day. She was happily married, diligently building a life with Mark, who, to his immense credit, made a consistent and admirable effort to bridge the lingering gap between their families. He would call me sometimes, genuinely curious, asking about our family, about our lives, which offered a small but significant comfort in the face of the unspoken tensions. The O'Connells, on the other hand, remained resolutely distant. Their interactions were polite, certainly, but always tinged with a noticeable reserve. Their invitations to family gatherings were infrequent, almost ceremonial, and always seemed to carry an unspoken, yet palpable expectation that we would somehow conform, would somehow morph into something more like them. Mr. O'Connell, I learned, ran a small but highly respected accounting firm in their city. It wasn't a sprawling empire or a vast corporate entity, but it was his livelihood, his carefully constructed reputation, painstakingly built over decades of dedicated work. He was known, widely and universally, for his meticulousness, his almost obsessive attention to detail, and his unwavering commitment to absolute discretion. He was, in many fundamental ways, a creature of habit, a devout adherent to established order and protocol. I didn't dwell on the events of the wedding. I filed the memory away, a painful but ultimately manageable scar, a stark reminder of the often unforeseen chasms that can exist between people, regardless of shared joy. But then a few months later, Sarah mentioned something in a casual, almost throwaway manner, while we were having coffee. "Oh, Dad's been having some trouble with his accountant," she said, stirring her latte with a thoughtful frown. "Mr. O'Connell. Apparently there's been a bit of a mix-up with some of his clients' tax filings. A rather significant one. He's apparently been putting it off, thinking it wasn't that serious." A seed of thought, small and seemingly insignificant, began to sprout in the fertile ground of my mind. I vividly recalled the disdain that had flickered in Mr. O'Connell's eyes at the wedding, the dismissive, almost contemptuous wave of his hand. Certain standards, meticulousness, attention to detail. My mind, trained in a different kind of observation, a more nuanced and pervasive form of scrutiny, began to piece together a nascent image, a subtle pattern emerging from the scattered fragments of information. I didn't do anything overtly theatrical or dramatic. There was no grand, Machiavellian scheme conceived in the shadows. My action, if one could even dignify it with such a term, was far quieter, far more organic, a gentle nudge rather than a forceful shove. It was about nudging the truth, gently, almost imperceptibly, so that it could reveal itself in its own time, in its own way. I began by doing what I did best, listening. I possessed a peculiar knack for remembering seemingly minor details, for connecting disparate pieces of information that others might overlook. I had always been the quiet observer at family gatherings, meticulously absorbing the ebb and flow of conversations, the unspoken tensions that simmered beneath the surface. And crucially, I had diligently maintained my own network, not of influential power brokers or societal elites, but of people who, like me, possessed a sharp eye for detail and a keen sense of observation. A former colleague who had transitioned into a related field, a close friend who had a surprising number of connections across various industries, even a distant cousin who happened to know someone who knew someone else. I recalled Mr. O'Connell's dismissive tone, his thinly veiled implication that our heritage, our way of life, was somehow less valuable, less sophisticated. It wasn't about seeking revenge, not in the traditional sense. It was about demonstrating in a quiet but undeniable way that the standards he so meticulously prized were not exclusive to his rarefied world, and that the act of overlooking or worse, demeaning others could and often did have unforeseen and far-reaching consequences, even for someone as seemingly insulated and self-assured as he was. I began to casually, almost incidentally disseminate information. When Sarah mentioned her father-in-law's accounting firm, I would pose innocuous questions, framing them as genuine, if somewhat naive curiosity. "Oh, is that so?" I'd ask, my voice light and airy. "What kind of accounts does he primarily manage? Big corporations, or more personal clients?" I'd then relay this seemingly trivial information to my contacts, not with any overt agenda or ulterior motive, but as if simply sharing a small, harmless tidbit of conversation. Then a new piece of the puzzle surfaced, again through Sarah, who, bless her honest nature, was an unwitting conduit of information. Her father, a man of quiet determination and honest hard work, had been trying to secure a significant loan for his small but burgeoning business. This loan was crucial, vital in fact, for his expansion plans that included hiring more people and increasing his company's reach. He had navigated the usual channels, diligently pursuing every avenue, but had repeatedly encountered frustrating roadblocks. He had even, with a degree of hesitant reluctance, approached Mr. O'Connell for advice, given his profession and perceived expertise. Mr. O'Connell, according to Sarah's recounting, had been unhelpfully vague. He had even, she recalled with a touch of her father's frustration, implied that her father's business wasn't stable enough for such a significant investment, a sentiment that eerily echoed his condescending pronouncements at the wedding. This, I realized, was the fulcrum. Mr. O'Connell, a man who prided himself on his profound understanding of financial stability and his uncanny ability to accurately assess risk, had, it seemed, assessed my father's business with the exact same dismissive, prejudiced lens he had used to appraise our family's entire heritage. I contacted an old university friend who had since embarked on a successful career at a large financial institution. I didn't make accusations. I didn't point fingers or cast blame. I simply presented a hypothetical scenario, a carefully constructed hypothetical. I explained that a family friend, a highly successful and enterprising small business owner, was experiencing unexpected difficulty in securing a vital loan for his company. I meticulously described the business, its impressive growth trajectory, its considerable potential. And then, almost as an afterthought, a casual addition to the narrative, I mentioned that a respected accountant, a Mr. O'Connell, had recently provided what was described as an unfavorable assessment of the business's overall stability. I deliberately emphasized the stark discrepancy between my friend's perceived robust assessment and Mr. O'Connell's seemingly contradictory and frankly baffling evaluation. My friend, possessing a sharp, analytical mind, understood the unspoken implication immediately. He didn't require me to spell out the nuances or to explicitly state the underlying prejudice. He simply stated that he would look into it, purely out of professional curiosity, a curiosity that, I suspected, was piqued by the intriguing anomaly I had presented. Within a matter of weeks, the whispers began to circulate. Not the boisterous shouts of scandal, but the quiet, insidious rustle of professional networks stirring. It transpired, quite remarkably, that Mr. O'Connell had indeed been letting certain crucial matters slide. A few of his larger, more complex client accounts had been, to put it mildly, mishandled. Nothing overtly fraudulent or illegal, one must hasten to add, but rather a series of unfortunate oversights, of delayed filings, of missed deadlines that had, over time, begun to accumulate into a significant and disquieting pattern. A few of his long-standing clients, noticing the growing disarray and the increasing lack of clarity, had quietly begun exploring alternative accounting services. Then my friend's institution, after conducting a discreet but thorough review of some of the financial documents that Mr. O'Connell's firm had provided for other loan applications submitted by his clients, discovered undeniable inconsistencies. Not enough, it was crucial to note, to trigger a full-blown criminal investigation, but certainly enough to raise serious, unignorable red flags regarding his professional competence and his adherence to due diligence. The word spread, not like a wildfire consuming dry brush, but like a slow-acting solvent, subtly but irrevocably eroding trust. Around the 6-month mark following the wedding, Sarah called me, her voice a curious blend of confusion and mild bewilderment. "You won't believe this," she began, her tone tinged with an almost incredulous disbelief. "Dad's loan just got approved, and with a much better interest rate than we ever expected." He said. The bank's loan officer mentioned something about a recent review of Mr. O'Connell's professional conduct. Apparently, his firm's reputation has taken a bit of a hit recently. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's really strange. Mark said his dad has been incredibly stressed lately. Apparently, some of his long-term clients have been moving their business elsewhere. He's been trying to downplay it, of course, but Mark thinks it's actually quite serious. The consequences, when they manifested, were quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone not actively looking for them. Mr. O'Connell's accounting firm, once a seemingly unshakable bastion of meticulous reputation, began to experience a slow but steady exodus of its clientele. It wasn't a dramatic, headline-grabbing implosion, but a gradual, almost insidious defection, driven by a quiet, pervasive erosion of trust. Clients who had previously relied implicitly on his perceived infallibility now began to question it. His legendary meticulousness, once his greatest professional asset, was now viewed with a newfound, and perhaps more accurate, suspicion. Was he truly meticulous, or was he merely rigid, unyielding, and prone to missing crucial nuances? The perception had shifted. He became more withdrawn, his once familiar condescending smile replaced by a perpetual weary frown. His wife, the woman who had so readily sneered at my heritage, was now seen far less frequently at social events, her own social standing subtly diminishing as her husband's professional reputation faltered. The O'Connells, who had so proudly prided themselves on their firmly established position in society, found themselves navigating a significantly less comfortable space, their influence waning not due to any overt or dramatic downfall, but due to the quiet, dawning realization that their carefully constructed foundations were not as solid or as unassailable as they had always believed. For me, there was no sense of triumph, no surge of vindictive satisfaction that I had expected, just a quiet, profound acknowledgement. The world, in its own subtle, intricate way, had corrected a minor yet significant imbalance. The standards that Mr. O'Connell had so readily and carelessly dismissed were, in fact, universal, applicable to everyone, regardless of their background. And sometimes a quiet observation, a meticulously placed piece of truth, was all that was needed for the intricate tapestry of circumstances to shift. Sarah was happy Mark was a good man, and that, ultimately, was what mattered most. The O'Connells were left to grapple with their own deeply ingrained perceptions and the quiet, yet undeniable, consequences of their own pervasive disdain.